Hey, this week on the podcast, Sonya and I discussed how to get an agent, what to do with that agent during the sort of proposal writing process, how to rely on that agent, and then how to celebrate with that agent. If you like what you listen to, don't forget to rate and review the podcast. If you want to connect with me, best way to do it is at paulkicksnewsletter.com, where I've got a free PDF waiting for you on the 7 things you can learn right now from Pulitzer Prize winners to make more money in your own writing. But today we're going to talk about the writing of the actual proposal and how your agent can help you. So let's get right to it. Second season, Now That's a Great Story, The Process. Episode 2, Season 2 of Now That's a Great Story, where again, this year we're going deep on a single subject, how to write a book. This season is going to chronicle how I'm writing my current book, and we're going to be answering a lot of questions for anybody who's aspiring to do this, and even questions for people who've done it before. This time, by popular demand, like last episode, my wife Sonya joins me. Sonya.
Hello.
What are you up to?
This?
That's the right answer.
Thank you.
All right. So in today's episode, we're going to cover how to get an agent and how to keep calm during that reading process. Because last time where we left off, we were discussing what happens after you finished your book proposal and handed it in to the agent. So there's something that happens after that, and it can be, was it nerve-wracking for me?
Yes. That's an understatement. Yes.
Like how did that manifest itself?
Through numerous ways. I don't think all of them would be very polite.
Well, I mean, this doesn't have to be a polite podcast. If you want to go ahead and disclose some of them, you can.
Throw you under the bus.
Please.
Well, I won't do that, but I will say it's a very stressful situation because it's, it's very personal work. You put in a lot of time, you put in a lot of effort. And then I think for the case for both books, like it took a while for you to get feedback, right?
Yeah. And we're gonna get to all of that. So like let's sort of dive right in. A lot of times people ask me, okay, I want to write a book, but like I see that do I have to get an agent? And the answer is yes. You in almost every circumstance need to get a book agent. And that's primarily because the book agent is going to be your bulldog. The book agent is going to be the person who is going to argue on your behalf with the publishing house for which you are about to write a book. And what the agent is doing, if he or she is doing his or her job well, is they are basically saying, this guy needs as much money as you guys can offer him. And it puts you, the author, in a somewhat difficult and compromised situation to be the person that's arguing that. So that's why you need a book agent, first and foremost. But there are many other benefits to having a book agent, and we're going to get to them in just a minute. But the first step to how to get them, I kind of feel like, Sonya, there are 3 ways to how to get a book agent. And I feel like the way that I got my first agent was probably like the luckiest of any way to get it, because there's basically, the first thing you can do is you can know somebody who's already an author, and you can ask that person to put in a good word for you with your agent, right? The second way to do it is to just read a ton of books in the genre that you want to write. And then a lot of times in the back, the author will have this acknowledgments page. And in that acknowledgments page will be like the agent that helped them.
But what did you do?
But that is not what I did.
That's not what you did.
No, I got very lucky.
Yes.
So what happened was I wrote a story that was literally about shit. It was about these people, these scientists in Oregon who had found a way to figure out how much meth had decimated their communities by going to the sewage treatment plants and looking for the sort of like small little particles of meth that made it through the body and ended up in the refuse and then ultimately into the sewage treatment plant. So that story then expanded into all like how much trash actually reveals about the body, how much trash reveals about society. That story was ultimately published by the Boston Globe. And it was through publishing that an editor at Penguin contacted me one day out of the blue and said, "Hey, I saw your essay. I really liked it. Would you ever consider doing it for a book?" And the truth was, I had been thinking about writing a book. Like, I'd been thinking about it for a while. I just hadn't thought that maybe that would be the book that I would want to do. So the way that I found an agent was, like, I was actually approached first by a publishing house and asked if I wanted to turn this into a book, at which point I said, sure, maybe. But then I had to quickly sort of back scramble and figure out, how could I find my agent? And that's when I got in touch with friends of friends who'd written books before. And then that's how I got in touch with my first agent. And the very short version of that story is, well, Sonya, do you want to tell the very short version of that story? Do you remember it?
No.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember it, but I do remember it being was that where you had to interview?
No. So what happened was there was basically, like, I had ended up piecing together this whole chapter by chapter outline, and it took 3 or 4 months at a time.
I remember
only
that.
to realize, like, my agent, I found this agent. He then told me, "Hey, have you seen this?" And what it was a book that was about to hit the market, literally on, like, what trash can teach us about society. And it was from a guy who'd won a Pulitzer Prize at, I think, like, the Orange County Register or something like that. And so I was like, ugh. Well, that, maybe just extend the metaphor, that stinks, right?
It did.
And I didn't want to do it. And so that pivoted me away from that book. That actually turned me toward The Saboteur and led me to better things. But, like, that's,
But that first agent was phenomenal.
Yeah. He was great. So that is how to do it. Now, I would think probably, like, if you are somebody who doesn't have a lot of friends who are authors, I really think that just, like, cold emails to people can be beneficial if you are saying in those emails, "Hey, I really like this book and saw that you represented this author. I'm interested in a similar sort of books. Here's some of the ideas that I have. Could I get on the phone with you, Zoom call with you? when the pandemic ends, could we go have coffee if we're in the same town?" Whatever the case may be, right? So that is, like, that's how you begin to get them. You just have to kind of be enterprising, and you just have to put your fears aside you and just figure, like, I got to figure out a way to do this. I don't remember, was I nervous when I was like reaching out to agents? I don't think I was, but
yes, of course you were.
Yeah, okay.
You were. You don't remember that. You were very nervous. I mean, it's a big decision. I think you were also very nervous when you were contemplating switching agents for this book.
Yes. And the first agent was great.
He was amazing.
Let me say, here's something else that you want in any agent, right? Because this is something that you need to think about. You need to think about, okay, how hard will this person fight for me? All right? That's key. But also, is this person somebody who has my best interest at heart? Meaning, like, if that agent is a part of a much larger agency, will this person read my stuff, or will the agent only be sort of handing my stuff off to other people? Like, I do remember this before I landed on the first agent. I did talk with a few other different agents, right?
You did. I remember that.
Some of them were with big agencies.
Yeah. But the one that you went with, hands down, I thought was the best. He was the one who really, I think, understood what you were trying to go for with the book. And I think really did a great job in putting you in touch ultimately with a house and an editor that really, really helped you shape that book into something extraordinary.
Yeah. And so this is, like, Sonya's hitting on a couple of things that are important, right? You want to figure out the person that's right for you. You also want somebody who's going to be a great reader of your material. Somebody who's going to be basically like another editor for it, right? if that's important to you, if you are a first-time author in particular, I sort of strongly recommend you find an agent who's going to be doing that for you.
I agree with you. I agree with you. But I think in your case, right, it was, I mean, you're a full-time writer. It's what you do. So I think you finding someone who understood how to, and I guess it can also apply, like if your full-time job is a scientist and you want to write a book about science, to find an agent that really understands how you think, how maybe you would put those words down on paper.
And understands the market for science books, right? Like this is how you think is one thing, and that can be very helpful, but then how those books, how your ideas themselves can translate into books that will then sell in some way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you just need to have after those first forays of emails, if you get some people to respond, you need to be sort of like thinking through these sorts of questions, because you have to remember in the end, they work for you.
They do, which I think is another point that was really interesting when you decided that it was time to change agents. Your first agent was amazing, and he was incredible.
But we just basically had like a difference of opinion over where to take the direction of one book. And the upshot of it was that it was sort of mutually understood that it might be best if we parted ways. So I have nothing but respect for him, but we sort of mutually agreed that we should move on.
And you had an incredible opportunity with your next agent.
Yes. So I'm currently represented. I'm currently represented by a guy named David Granger. David's the former editor-in-chief of Esquire magazine, and he's now doing this for a living. He's now representing authors for a living. And David and I have had a great working relationship so far. Like, he has actually been, for this book, he was a great read on, okay, I think this will work. I think this won't. He talked a lot about what could sell here. It was once we got to the point where we were discussing the manuscript on the page, his sort of editor instincts took over as much, and they were sort of coupled by those agent instincts. And for me at least, that is incredibly helpful. Now, I have some author friends who really just want people who are going to go out and just get them the money. And like, that's what they want. They leave the editing to the actual editors at the house. So it kind of just depends on what you're comfortable with and what you're after. Because basically there are all sorts of different agents that can serve all of those different roles for you.
Right. But for you, I know it was incredibly, I mean, you have such a tight relationship with your agent. I mean, not just you in general, but I think as much time and much effort when you work through a proposal and you work with an agent, for you to have someone that you felt like was a good fit, you could bounce ideas off of, you could talk to and have, I mean, you're spending so much time with them, with your work. I think for anyone searching for an agent, when you do decide to have an agent, you really have to pick someone that you feel like you can have a good working relationship with, who understands you on several different several different levels. And I think for Mr. Granger, he, as an editor, I think he understands the way you work in a very unique kind of way.
Yeah, yeah.
Aside from me, of course.
Well, yeah, Sonya's still, of course, there too. And, I think that it's always helpful to have, and this is the editor part of my brain, right? Because I split my time between writing and editing. I think it's important to have a few but vital different points of information about a piece of work. I read something fascinating about Philip Roth, and I mentioning him on this podcast almost means that I'm trying to compare myself to him. I'm not trying to do that. What I'm trying to do instead is to say that he would have, he had a group of 6 or 7 people outside of the publishing house who would read each book that he was writing and provide feedback on it. And he chose these 6 or 7 people deliberately, knowing that each of them would be sort of the best at examining a certain aspect or a certain tone of one of his novels as he was writing them. I just find that fascinating. I think that's for him that worked. So I think it's again, it comes back to you, your your comfort level, like what you think you want. There's all sorts of agents out there. All right, so once you get that agent, then you're going to get to the point where you have finished the manuscript with them. And then you're going to get to the point where, all right, now it needs to go out to publishing houses. All right, so I'm going to walk you through a couple scenarios, what happened to me on both of these books, because they are distinct, but also somewhat representative of what happens for basically anybody in publishing. The first go round, the saboteur, I did not know this at the time. I just thought this was a cool story to tell. But turns out that like World War II nonfiction is something that cannot exhaust itself as a subject. So there's like a built-in audience for that. And that proposal went sort of apeshit crazy. Like we were surprised by the response to that, how many different people were keen to talk about that, right? Like,
oh yeah. We were very surprised.
I was thinking like we might have 1, 2, maybe 3 people want to be involved. And there were 7 or 8. And the response was so, it's in a way bizarre because like
it was surreal.
It was surreal. Like I had never experienced anything like that where people were just almost hungry to consume it. I'm like, I'm a first time author. And my agent was like, look, this does not happen all that often. So I think some of that is the strength of Robert's story. I think that like his life
your agent did a really
incredible
job.
He knew how to sell that to these various publishing houses.
And I think without him, having him as you went through this process, because it was so surreal for us. I mean, we didn't really know how to respond to it except show up, but he was fantastic. He was fantastic. Great.
So, that happened. And so the next step was HarperCollins, the house I ultimately went with for that book. They did something called a preempt, which just basically meant that they were going to make an offer on it before it closed. I hope I'm getting that language right for any agents that might be listening. But basically what happened was we knew that we had at least one offer in the bag. So I live in Connecticut. I drove down one day to New York, and it was one of the greatest days of my life, just to meet with all of these different publishing houses, because you're going into Random House, you're going into Penguin, you're going into HarperCollins, you're going into some of the biggest houses, in the world. And that was the surreal part for me, even more than knowing that there was this interest, because you send the letter, you send this proposal out, and we got an immediate sort of response to it. Right. And so that was really comforting. So, and then to go down and just sort of be, in some sense, lauded for the proposal.
Right. But something that I thought was really interesting about that day was, when you're taking these meetings, you're having these conversations, and these editors you're talking to these editors about how they would shape the book, I thought, as a layperson, you kind of walk in and they show you a check, and then you just pick whomever has the largest paycheck. But it really was, again, like picking your agent. It was a situation where I felt like you got to pick which house you felt more comfortable with. And I remember us having conversations about these conversations you were having with these different houses, and feeling like you very much had a say in who you wanted to go with, who you liked, who maybe you didn't feel were seeing eye to eye with you. Is that fit your recollection?
that's really important, right? And I think what you said a minute ago is true. As much as you're choosing an agent, right? As much as you're trying to figure out that agent that aligns with your values, when you are talking with these houses, as much as they are interviewing them, as much as they are interviewing you, you are interviewing them.
Right.
And you need to realize that, like, you're trying to figure out in this, probably most of them are hour-long meetings. Do we fit? Do we click? Do we see the same things? The first one was easier because I knew that there was at least going to be one offer. And so the whole day was just like wow, now I'm in Random House, and look, like those are the books that, like, there's John Updike's books framed on the walls. Wow, like, I mean, that was just the part was just like, oh my God, some of my literary idols, I'm walking the halls where their books were published. That was incredible, an incredible day. But the main thing of each of those meetings was, are we clicking? Are we clicking? Are we clicking? And then you don't actually discuss money in that meeting. Like, that's the thing that you should probably keep in mind. Like, don't go in there looking for any sort of handout. And I was a bit naive on that. And it's actually taken both agents I've had to remind me of that fact, because a part of me would have been like, well, how much are you going to offer? Like, I would kind of want to know that information up front, which is, and this is a sort of like I think this is almost like the book publishing old genteel code in a way, right? Like, let's leave the money until the end, right?
Maybe. I think, though, more than anything, like we said before, it's just giving you an opportunity. You spent years of your life working on this book and working with.
You would spend years ultimately, right?
But you're working with this house, you're working with this editor, and then ultimately you're working with, their publicity team or whomever they give you. So it's like a marriage, and you really have to pick, the right house for you. And that was something that I didn't realize, but we ultimately ended up having to give a lot of thought to. And I know you were very happy with it. I was very happy. I thought they were fantastic too.
Who's really, the
they? HarperCollins.
Yeah.
They really gave you the space to do what you need to do. And I think, each book that you write, I think that's an important factor in whatever decision you make.
So one question that I've always asked in all of these meetings is, can you tell me a little bit about your editing process? Because what I'm trying to understand is very much that. I want to know how this editor thinks and how he or she will interact with me. But I also want to know, I want to try to put out of my mind this sort of nagging question that I have, that I've heard about the book publishing industry. And, we've talked about this before. There are houses that don't spend the sort of time with books that they should editing those books. And so you want to be with a house that's going to give your book the sort of care that you think it deserves. And if you start to get a sense that there's a cookie cutter format, or there's some sort of, like factory aspect of this. And I had that sense, I'm not going to name names, but I had that sense with a couple of houses, and it's sort of like, I didn't want to go with them, right? Like, there's this story when I was going through this process, the first one for sure, I kept in the back of my head this story that David Foster Wallace had gone through with one of his first novels. There was a house that offered him more money than Little Brown, with whom he met, and he really liked Little Brown. And he ended up saying that, no, he turned down more money because he had the sense that, like, this other place was like a factory, and he didn't want that. What he wanted instead was an editor who really cared for him and somebody who understood him. And so that's what he was after. Like, this goes back to like what we were discussing a minute ago. This is as much you questioning them as them questioning you. All right, so that's the first one. We said that we would discuss the nerve-wracking nature of the reading process. And so let's talk about what happened during the pandemic with the second book, because there were some nerves there, far more than the first one, right?
Right.
The pandemic changed some stuff.
How so?
Well, for one, like, it was hard. It was the second book, we didn't know how it would do, and we had people interested, but it wasn't the sort of overwhelming response that we got the first time, right? It wasn't like, oh my God, I can't wait to do this. It was slightly more muted, the initial reads.
I think that was tough for you. I think you had such an incredible experience the first time. I think that this muted response, you immediately took it as some form of rejection because your response wasn't as great as you received with the saboteur, which was a completely different animal.
Yeah. So like this response is just, you send it out, the agent sends it out, and you begin to hear via email who wants to actually sign up for a meeting. And again, we got like, if I met with 7 or 8 people the first time, I met with 5 or 6 the second time.
Right.
So it wasn't like there was no interest. It was just that it was not immediate, and it
took a while.
Not overwhelming.
It was not overwhelming. It took a while. A lot of houses kind of took their time in getting back. Mr. Granger did a great job. Again, it was credit of lining up houses and people that were really, really interested in what you had to say, which was great because it's a unique book. It has a really unique perspective, and I think finding the right people to understand what you wanted to do was important. And to his credit, I think Mr. Granger did that. But
you can call him David. You don't have to call him Mr. Granger.
I'm going to call him Mr. Granger.
Or you can just call him Granger. I think he prefers Granger.
Okay. Well, I'm not there yet. Okay. So I think that it was just, it was new because the saboteur went out. You go out and you have all of these meetings, and it's basically a parade around these different houses. And this experience was much different. But I think for you, because it was so incredibly different, I felt like you internalized that, and it felt like a rejection.
Even before we got to the meetings?
Even before you got to the meetings. I think you were doubting whether or not this would get picked up at all. I remember very clearly you not anticipating on getting a lot of meetings. You thought, well, maybe I'll get 1, maybe I'll get 2. And I remember you had maybe 4 or 5, and we were all elated. We were really excited about that. It was just a different child, the first book came out and was like running right away. And I felt like this one, there had to be a lot of hand holding to get it to the place where, it could get in front of people. And it was a challenge.
And it's a little bit like, I attribute that to a couple things. Number one, it's the pandemic. So I think in some ways it's houses trying to make sense for like, all right, what are we spending money on in this day and age? Though I will say that houses have continued to spend money. So I don't know that that's necessarily it. I think some of it as well just goes back to sort of genre, right? Like this book will be a blend of my own story in what I see as the most pivotal 10-week period in the civil rights movement, which is, and despite the 50 years worth of books on the civil rights movement, I think I have a story that actually has not been told. I think there's a great story to do here on the Birmingham campaign, and we'll be discussing that, of course, in much greater detail in subsequent episodes. But I think like just that blend of memoir and history, tight focused history, maybe it turned people off. I don't know. Like maybe like I thought I actually wrote a stronger proposal this time than last time. But maybe it just didn't grab people, right? And you just don't know. And that's the nerve-wracking part.
That happens.
That happens. It's only been a few months ago, and maybe like this is why I love to have you on, because maybe I blocked some of this stuff out. Like,
you did.
Like, how bad was I?
You were bad.
Like what?
It was really stressful. I mean, you had a lot of self-doubt. You want those big meetings. You want people to be responsive to your work. You want that kind of validation that the amount of time that you've put in, that this idea is solid, and you didn't get that right away. And that was really tough, waiting for people to make meetings. I think, Mr. Granger had given...
he's going to think this is so funny when he listens to this, too.
Okay,
that he's Mr. Granger.
Well, he's Mr. Granger. I mean, I'm respectful. I don't know about you.
Go on.
But I'm respectful. But I think, he had... people wanted to read it. I remember very vividly, a lot of people wanted to read it. And he had given them a deadline. And we were really excited, thinking that these people that were reading it, these editors that want to read it, were going to make appointments and wanted to meet you, and nothing happened right away.
Yeah, I remember that. There
And
was a
you were,
lull. There was like a 10-day
yeah,
lull where I'm
and
like,
you felt
whoa, what is
defeated.
that?
Yeah, you felt defeated. But I think, I don't necessarily think this is something that is wholly due to the book. I mean, that's your personality as well as a writer. That's how when you turn something in, if an editor doesn't respond to you right away, you're like, what's wrong? Like, what is wrong with this piece? Did it not work? There's been lots of times where you've turned in work and editors, for whatever reason, haven't gotten back to you right away. And immediately it goes into that place of self-doubt. And, well, what if this isn't right? What if I should have done this or that? And I think that happened with this proposal too. And the first one, when you turn that in.
I remember the first one being very nervous, like what would the response be? And I was just so elated that it was over, that it was so positive right away. Surprised, really.
Well, this is, another reason why I'm glad that you worked with Mr. Granger is because he understood what you were trying to do, but he also appreciated your writing. And these are things that, I try and tell you, like, your work speaks for itself. Your work is very good. Like, the right person will come along and understand what you're trying to do. Like, you have a very clear vision. You have a very clear focus. It's not like you're an inexperienced writer who needs to be shaped. You have a very clear voice, and finding someone to appreciate that voice and understand it and work with it and nurture it with a house is what you ultimately found.
Yeah.
But it took a while.
So let's move ahead to the actual meetings themselves this time. I have no idea how much longer the pandemic's going to last. If it does, you're going to probably do meetings the way that I did them, which is you do them over Zoom. And it's not terrible, right? Like, it's not great. I preferred the face-to-face interaction, but you do get the time with the editor. You do get to ask them the questions. It was the same sort of rules that applied. I wanted to hear what they liked about the book. I wanted to hear what they didn't like about the book. I wanted to hear what they didn't like about the proposal. I wanted to hear what they liked about the proposal. I wanted to hear how they would shape the proposal into a book. I had my own questions about working with them. It's just a sort of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
But what I also remember that was important about those meetings is that, I would peek in between meetings and ask you how it would go. And you would say, this meeting was incredible. And this editor I loved, and I thought they were amazing, and I thought we'd do great things. And then they would make an offer.
Yes. So that's the sort of final step. And this is the thing that, like, well, when does the money actually come into play? With both of these books, the similarity was you finish the meetings, and then it's like the really nerve-wracking part, because both agents I've had have then set a second deadline, right? All right, here's the date by which you need to make an offer. And again, first time we knew we had at least one offer, so I was cool. Second time,
we had no idea.
We had no idea. And I'll say this, like, the Saboteur was a bestseller on Amazon, right? It was number one on a couple of history lists and whatnot when it came out. So it did decently. It did not crack the New York Times bestseller list. And
Not yet.
Not yet. And so part of that was like, our house is going to stay away, because they saw that the first book was not, it was not a New York Times bestseller. You never know. And I've heard, you hear, like, so few books actually do make that list. So, and Granger was great about, like, saying, hey, you just write the book that you can, and you let everything else take care of itself.
Which is what you needed. You needed someone to tell you that. Write the book that you can.
And don't worry about trying to write the book that'll sell.
Yes.
Yeah, because as soon as you try to write the book that'll sell, then you're actually not staying true to your vision. It's a whole thing that you want to avoid. Maybe that can actually be a whole, like, separate episode down the road.
I think so. This wasn't your first idea for your second book.
Yeah. So maybe we can, but the point is that it's like, all right, in that moment, after we finish the meeting, but before the date, it's just sort of like, ooh. And then the day itself, it was a Wednesday. I remember that. And the deadline was 3 p.m. And I do what I do when I get really nervous. I just bury myself in work. That day, I think I started working.
I was going to say eat.
Also not untrue. I remember getting up that day and starting working at like 6 a.m.
You worked all day.
And just being like, I'm just going to do everything possible to occupy my time until like 2:30, right? And then I got the call from Granger, and I'm going to leave the offers out because I don't want to do that to the houses, but we had a few different offers, and
very different offers.
Yes,
very different.
I'm not going to say figures, but I will say they were very different offers, and also different interpretations of what they wanted the book to be.
Yes,
so you're choosing
really interesting.
Yes, because you're choosing, like, some people just wanted the history bit. They're like, you can write about your own story in op-eds or essays. And we went with we went with Celadon, which is a Macmillan imprint. And we went with them for the money, yes, but we also went with them because Celadon's vision most closely aligned with what I was hoping the book can do.
But here's something else that I think is really important to mention. Money, of course, is nice. It's not the end-all be-all, but we really had to consider an offer that would pay you enough to be able to do this book.
That is key. And in both of these proposals, both of the agents have told me, you have to don't think that you're being greedy if you go for the most money, don't think you're being greedy for taking the most money. Think instead about, this is how much resources I will have to actually do the sort of research and reporting that I need to do. For the first book, I needed a lot of resources because it was international travel, right? And for the second book, resources-wise, I don't think I need as much, but you still want to get like enough where you're not having to think about, can I even do the work I need to do to make this book as good as possible? Or am I going to put myself, my family, whatever, in some sort of financial peril for trying to do this work?
And it is hard. I mean, we had to sit down. And of course, because it was your second book and it's domestic, we had, I would say, a very good idea of the kind of work that it would take, the kind of travel it would take. But also, you can never account for things. Maybe you discover something and you have to take a trip. So, I mean, there's just a lot of things that are variables that we can't pin down. And you just cannot, I mean, we knew there was a number that you just could not do this book on. I mean, you just couldn't do it. Yeah. It wouldn't work for our family.
And that's,
that's a tough thing.
And I could cite numbers, but they really are not going to be that helpful because each number is just completely arbitrary. It's what you think your book needs, how many resources you need to do it. And really, you're only going to, this is the thing that's kind of terrifying. You're only going to figure that out once you actually get into it. I think that it took almost the whole of the first book, because you said something that we found repeatedly in the first book. We would map out, we would plan, we would budget, and then it would be like, well, I have to do, they just flat out had to do this, right? Spend this grand on this sort of, spend $1,000 to get access to this
freelancer,
archive.
Yeah, or spending for freelancers,
for interpreters.
Yes.
There were just so many costs that it's like, I have to spend this. If I don't spend this, I simply cannot do the book that I want to do.
Right. And so really understanding, I think as a family, if you're married, your spouse, your husband or wife, or your partner, you have to really sit down and say, will I be able to do this? How many years are we looking at? How much money will I be able to spend each year? And do it. And that was something I remember, I don't remember if it was this idea or another idea where you got an offer that I remember that you got an offer and we were like, you cannot do this. You cannot take this offer. And that was a hard conversation because it was, do you write this book or, and risk us going into some sort of financial debt, to pay for this book and then just relying on it's a tough thing, but you really have to give some thought to it. We do. We had to get, I mean, I can imagine everyone does, but we certainly do.
Yeah. So, I end up, to round this out, I say to Granger, let's do the deal with Celadon. We do it. I call the editor there. Her name is Jamie. She's fantastic. Had a great meeting with her. We completely clicked. And I'm excited, right? I'm excited. And so the final thing I would say is like, take some time to reflect what you just did, right? Like we set a time. It was tough in the pandemic because all we could really do was just like have a meal. But we had a meal, right?
We did. We had a meal.
We celebrated. It was just us. Or were the kids there? Gosh, now I don't even remember.
No, it was just us.
Yeah. And it was special. And we did something similar with the Saboteur too, right? Because like this is, to get a deal like that, that is no small thing.
To get a deal is no small. I mean, it's a ton of work. It is a ton of work. And if you have a full-time job, at some point, I think maybe even an episode, like how you did that and managed to work and write this proposal.
I think that actually in the next few episodes, we can really dig into, like next time I want to talk about how not to start your research. Cause I think there are some clues. There's some things that we did wrong with the first book.
Yeah.
That can be really instructive. But you're right. Like I want to spend some time with us talking about like how to manage having another gig while you do this.
How you managed it.
Yeah. Well, how I managed it. But because I do get a lot of questions from readers or, people that subscribe to my newsletter that are just like, wait, I would have to quit my job. And the answer is no, you don't.
If you have an amazing wife like me.
You do need a supporting partner.
You really do.
You really do. But the answer is you do not need to quit. You just have to be super disciplined about your time.
Which is really tough to do all
Which
the
is
time.
tough.
Yeah.
Which is
so
tough.
you can talk about that. I can certainly add input to that.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's a pretty good place to stop.
Me too.
All right. Now that's a great story. The music for it comes from one Jeffrey Willett. Sometimes some production help still comes from him as well, although he's kind of outgrown us.
I hope not.
Yeah, we'll have to see. If you like what you're hearing, head over to paulkicks.com/newsletter. Sign up for my newsletter there. Every week I choose stories that I like. Every week I talk about more craft stuff than we do here. That's not just based on writing books, but about sort of the whole genre of long form writing. So paulkicks.com/newsletter. Sign up for the newsletter. I guess we'll just see. I think, Sonya, the audience likes what they hear.
You're darn right.
I think they want to keep you around.
I'm pretty much a big deal.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll be back next week. Hey, thanks for listening. If you like this season of Now That's a Great Story, or are just getting caught up on the first, the best way to keep in touch is through the newsletter, paulkicksnewsletter.com. There, you'll get even more advice on how to be the best writer and storyteller you can be. In fact, right now, I've got a free PDF for you. The 7 rules top long-form writers follow to make more money from their stories. Sign up for the newsletter and you'll get the free PDF. Head there now, paulkicksnewsletter.com.